Okay, good afternoon. The current time is 2:01 and it is Thursday, the 25th of June, and we are here for our convening our Las Cruces Economic Recovery Ad Hoc Board. So I'm going to officially call this meeting to order. And it looks like we do have, it looks like we do have quorum. Is that correct, Mr. Guzman? 1, 2.
Let me see. I believe Cynthia would be able to answer that better than I would.
Cynthia, do you know if we have quorum right now? I believe we do. I'm just not sure about two of the names on here.
Yes, we're just missing 2 members.
Perfect. So we do have quorum. So we are going to go ahead and move on to any conflict of interest that anyone may have on the board. If you do, will you please raise your hand so we can address that now? As I see no hands being raised, we're going to go ahead and move on to the acceptance of the agenda as current. We do need to have a motion to move up discussion item number 2, restoring public confidence in Mexico's Safe Promise campaign in Las Cruces, to discussion point number 1 due to time constraints. So if anyone would like to make that motion on the floor so we can go ahead and get that moved, I'll entertain that now.
I'll move that item up to number 1. This is Michael Harris.
Mr. Harris has moved that we put number 2, restoring public confidence, to discussion point number 1. Do I have a second?
I second that motion. This is Brooke Montgomery.
Ms. Montgomery has seconded that. Any discussion on changing discussion item number 2 to number 1 due to time constraints? As I hear none, voting over Zoom is always so much fun. If I can just have any nays to the motion of moving discussion number 2 to number 1, please raise your hand or come over video and let us know. If not, I will take everyone in favor of moving discussion point number 2 to number 1. Please say aye.
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 Thank you.
Aye.
Okay, so that does pass. Now looking at the agenda as amended, is there any other changes to the agenda that we have in front of us besides the amended? As I see none, I would entertain a motion to accept the agenda as amended.
So moved, Debbie Moore.
Thank you, Miss Debbie. Do I hear a second?
Second, Sharon Thomas.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Any discussion on the agenda as amended? As I see none, all in favor of the amended agenda, please come over video and please say aye.
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 Wonderful. Any nays? Seeing or hearing none, motion does pass with the amended agenda. Next on the agenda is going to be minutes for approval. We have been in contact with Cynthia on our minutes for the last 2 meetings. I believe we're waiting on a transcribing service, I believe, to go ahead and get those minutes published and out to us. So I do not know. Is there a timeline for when we should be expecting the last 2 meetings minutes?
Yes, we should have those tomorrow. So you guys will be able to review and then you can go over them on the next meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So we will have those tomorrow, and then we will go ahead and be reviewing those before our next meeting, where we will go ahead and review the minutes and approve them or amend them as needed. So we're going to go ahead and go straight into our discussion topics and get this meeting going. Before we do start that, I know that there was a couple new people on that I see. If you guys want to go ahead and come on and just say hello, state your name, if you have any organization or affiliation, if you'd like to do that at this time, that would be awesome.
This is Mike Bartholomew. I'm the transit administrator for the city of Las Cruces. So I'm joining this meeting for the public transportation protection discussion.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Michael. Anyone else on that would like to introduce themselves to the group that has not prior to today?
My name is Jamey Rickman. Good afternoon, Las Cruces Economic Recovery Ad Hoc Committee members. I represent the Community Engagement Office for the City of Las Cruces, and I'll just be speaking just to a very, very small part of number 1 after Mr. Pallares.
Wonderful, thank you and welcome. Okay, and then just another quick discussion item. We will be, due to Public Meetings Act, we will be disabling the chat feature, technical issues that someone might be having, as all comments need to be public since we are streaming through YouTube and they are not able to see that. So if you can please make sure to raise your hand if you have anything to say. Instead of typing it into the chat box, please do say it during the meeting so that we can have proper record keeping and adding that to the minutes for follow-up and review. So we are going to be having that more so disabled during the meetings. Okay, so moving on to the discussion items, we do have Restoring Public Confidence, New Mexico Safe Promise campaign in Las Cruces that we're going to be reviewing and going over right now. Do we have a, Francisco, did we have anyone
Mr.
talking
Chair,
on this?
Mr. Chair, this is Francisco Pallares. Let me start my video, sorry. Yes, I think Ms. Debbie Moore wanted to take the lead on the discussion for this portion. And then we're gonna have a portion discussed from the city's perspective with Ms. Jamey Rickman. And once the discussion is over, we'll move ahead to Ms. Jamey Rickman if that's fine with the board. So that's our portion.
Of course. Ms. Moore, is that perfectly okay with you?
That is fine.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, and take it away, Ms. Rickman.
Debbie Moore, and I am with the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce, and I believe you all, as fellow board members, have a copy of some ideas I had. One of the things I've been thinking about that I've heard in the last, particularly 8 to 10 weeks, is safety. And I was also thinking of something this board could make immediately recommendations to the city council. Is the New Mexico Safe Promise campaign is created for statewide, but I think we can do some adaptation and promotion of it for our Las Cruces community through a grassroots initiative. I think what is most important on the safety side is the citizens need to feel safe going into business. Business needs to feel safe with the customers coming in, and the employees need to feel safe as well. While the New Mexico Safe Promise is not anything that's perhaps legal or enforceable, it is a promise that I believe we could really do a good job statewide, citywide, of promoting to try to get 100% participations. And businesses, i.e., could put a statement up on their windows that all their employees had made this the promise, as well as people could, there is a badge that you get when you do the promise on campaign. We could add a Las Cruces tagline to it, and then they can promote that. Churches, Pastor Doug, I thought of you, and churches can certainly do this as well. And I think nonprofits can promote it to their client base. This is just an across the board way of hopefully people feeling safe enough to get out a little bit more, which companies they feel safe going into, if that we all pledge that we have committed this promise. So with that, I will ask Jamey or Francisco if they have anything to add to that.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, this was a spun-off of the discussion that was held on the last meeting for the Las Cruces Economic Recovery Board, specifically a presentation by Mr. Paul Dahlgren showing some of the initiatives that people are social distancing, that they're staying at home if they feel sick, that they are washing their hands constantly, and that they're basically following all the safety guidelines that have been recommended for preventing COVID-related diseases. I will now, if you, with your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll defer to Ms. Jamey Rickman from the perspective of the City Communications Office, how this follows.
Thank you, Mr. Pallares. I appreciate your introduction. I don't have a formal presentation, but I do have the ability to impart to you, based on various discussions of information, that we can prepare content on the city's website that reflects the current status from the governor's office and whatever official messaging that we need to put out there, so it's consistent with what the state is saying and has the same information, so we cut down on confusion and whatnot. But on the city's website, what we have to look at, and I was reviewing this yesterday, is repackaging a lot of the information so it's easy to find and easy to digest for businesses, because the business owners are very busy and they're struggling in this time. So we need to make it as easy, compact, and digestible as possible for them, and then provide those resources to them in such a way that they can just easily find it. If you look at our COVID section on the website right now, it's a little tough to kind of wade through a lot of those things. And so I think we have a lot of the content that exists already. It's just a matter of kind of again, repackaging it in such a way that it makes it very easy for folks in the community to be able to use. And then with that information too, the city would be able to use whatever branding you all approve for this project as we move forward. And so, you know, the look and feel for all that information would be consistent. And I think as part of the discussion yesterday too, is that, you know, making that consistent throughout the community, being able to share resources with agencies and other government entities too, to be able to have that consistent look and feel throughout all platforms within the community. And so no matter where you would go, you see whatever that branding looks like, and you're able to dive right into the information right away and get what you need. And that information would be directions on how, you know, just basic stuff that's already there. And then templates for self-printing flyers, if that's what we decide to do, or what you decide to do, whatever materials that you think would be necessary and helpful for the business community and for the community at large regarding going back to business and getting back to life here in Las Cruces, that's what we would put up there. So that's essentially what I've had to present. I just wanted to give you the assurance that we would be able to do those things.
So, Mr. Chair, committee members, just the other thing we could do is add inserts into the water billing about the New Mexico Safe, i.e. the Las Cruces identification and customization spin on this, and it would be ran much like a political campaign, for lack of a better term, but I think it would begin to embrace all levels within our community. I know last meeting that we heard about the New Mexico Safe accreditation for businesses. That right now is just for the hospitality industry, which we will be promoting, but we would wait a little bit on this campaign for that second tier to wait till more information is that before we absolutely design our own information. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's my ideas to perhaps for this board to consider moving this forward, maybe as a suggestion for the city council on our first accomplishment, and to get this off the ground as a Las Cruces Safe program.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Moore and Mrs. Rickman. I think I know that we did talk about this at our last meeting and thought that this was more the way that we need to be going forward. And I really think this is a great idea to start working on, and it gives us concrete evidence that we're actually doing something that is in line with what the state is putting forth as well. So I think this is great. With that being said, Mrs. Rickman, do you have anything else that you wanted to add on your behalf about the program as you see it right now?
Not at this point. It's very early in the generation of this program, and there's a lot of work to be done. But again, we would be able to share those resources with the rest of the community members and see how far we can expand it and make this a unified and consistent campaign, which is super important, I think. And we can look at all kinds of different strategies of getting the message out there. It could even include yard signs for business properties and things like that that are branded with all of this, in addition to window, papers in the front windows and things like that. So we have a lot of good ideas to make this cohesive on our end, and lots of material to use. And so we just need to be able to move forward on it as soon as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. We appreciate that. Board, do you guys have any questions for Mrs. Rickman or Mrs. Moore at this time about the current plan that they have in place? Mr. Cohen.
Thank you. This is Doug Cowan. I just wanted to ask, I think it would be important. I like the idea. We're not reinventing a wheel. I like that. I like the idea that it would be something that could be done extremely quickly. I think one of my biggest question is, and I heard Ms. Rickman say that she would use all resources possible to try to get the word out and promotion. Is it possible that we would be able to contact every business owner by registration and let them know that we have this program, that it's a voluntary program, but that we feel like it might help build some of their consumer confidence? So that, because quite often businesses, especially smaller businesses, may not be in the know on something like this. They're busy trying to dig the trench, and so they don't have time to sometimes come up and get air. Could we somehow get a campaign where it would be a direct mail directly to a contact of each business that's registered?
For the question, Mr. Callan, I appreciate that. This is Jamey Rickman again from the City of Las Cruces. Yes, absolutely. We could certainly use our business registration resources. We can use a lot of databases that we have that aren't necessarily business related too. I mean, we want the whole community to understand this program because it's a two-way street. It's not just the businesses, it's also the community at large having confidence that they're going to safe businesses and that they will stay safe if they are going out and utilizing our businesses and whatnot in the community. So it's critically important to get that information out in all methods. And the reason I was kind of vague on using all methods at our disposal is because we need to identify what those are. And so as this goes along, it's very similar to what we've been doing with the Census 2020 campaign. And it's everybody's a stakeholder in it in some form or fashion. You just have to be able to package the information in such a way that appeals to that particular stakeholder group. And so that's what we're working on right now, is making that very specific so it's effective.
So, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mrs. Moore.
Just point of clarification. I think social media would be very important to this as well, as that, and how do we move this forward? So my asking staff, do I need to make a motion to move to accept this as our number one recommendation and ask Jamey to come back with maybe a more defined where we're going to be using and what media, et cetera, and sort of the outline of the program? Or do we just need a motion to say this is what we're going to do and move it forward? But I mean, personally, I'd rather move so we can maybe see the final detail of who, how, where, when, et cetera. I'm asking for clarification on what needs to be done for staff. Griselda, Francisco?
Mr. Chair, this is Francisco Pallares for the record. Yes, Debbie, if this is what you decide to put on the recommendations for the mayor and city council, you can certainly, well, it's actually a board decision, right? if you want to take this as one of the recommendations for city council, that's certainly one of the things that the chairman can include in his report. Whether we need a vote on it, actually, I would have to defer that question, I think, to Griselda. I think you would, but I just would like to double check on that.
Thank you, Francisco. This is Griselda Martinez for the record. Mr. Chair, since it's an action item, I do believe that it will have to be voted because that will be an action item to go to City Council and Mayor.
So based on that, Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the New Mexico State Promise Las Cruces personalization and customization of the program for the entire community to be our first recommendation to City Council. And I would ask part of my motion that we actually see the final plan before it goes to them, but there we go. There's my motion.
Okay, we do have a motion on the table to accept.
I second that.
We do have a second. Was that you, Sharon? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I second it.
Okay, so we do have a motion and a second on the floor to accept this as our first board recommendation to the City Council upon review of this ad hoc board. Is that correct, Mrs. Moore?
That's correct. I'd like to see a final, even if it's a timeline and next week's meeting.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Cohen.
Before you take the final vote on that, I've just got a quick question. Could we, maybe Ms. Moore could generate maybe like a schematic of what she discussed? I love the idea. I think it's fantastic, but a schematic so we know exactly what's going to be built, so that we expedite the final product.
I believe that's sort of what I'm asking for. I had submitted some verbiage. Did you get the verbiage, Pastor Cowan?
Yes.
Something more than that, I would be happy to do. But that's sort of what I'm asking for the final, for the staff to take our discussion today and move it into either dates, timelines, where, who, how, where, when. That's what I would like to see prior to it be going into our chairman's report to the City Council. Does that answer your question? Okay, good.
Okay, so and this is open for discussion since we do have a motion on the floor with a second. Adrian, can I become a host again? It looks like I lost my power to do things.
Yeah, 1 second.
Thank you. And Ms. Sharon Thomas, I do see that your hand is raised if you'd like to go next, please.
Chair?
Are we going to be able to see the materials? What are we borrowing from the state that we're going to use? Is it a particular layout, symbols? Are we going to have? We'd like to have the opportunity to see what the materials are going to look like before we actually move forward with this.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could interject right here, Ms. Thomas, Debbie Moore for the record, we are using the logo of the New Mexico Safe Promise logo, and they have guidelines on how we can use that. And I believe we can add our own personal tagline to that. It would not be reinventing a logo, but rather probably having a tagline as part of that logo. And I believe within the scheme of the law, what is given us opportunity from the state, we can do that to sort of customize it. So it's basically that New Mexico Safe Promise logo with a tagline specific to Las Cruces. And I believe the city is looking at some options. God Promise was one thing that came to my mind as I was reading this, but that we would be using their logo, but with our tagline.
So their logo with our tagline, I'm just repeating to make sure I understand it. And
right.
This has some guidelines for how materials can be used. And so that's what we're asking the staff to bring to us at the next meeting to show us, what are some possible taglines and ideas for other materials and what the timeline might be.
Exactly, exactly. And Mr. Chair and Ms. Thomas and Debbie Moore, for the record, part of what is also on the state is some posters and things like that. So I believe I would respectfully ask Ms. Rickman to look at that possibility of maybe utilizing some materials that are already there. I think the biggest thing here is we don't have to reinvent this huge wheel, so we can get this program a quick turnaround for the city, so we can begin to have this, because I know it's the fear, anxiety is causing some people not to want to go out, as well as I think some of the businesses are anxious about their customers coming in. So I think the quicker we can do a turnaround, but I would like to see some suggested taglines, perhaps some suggested designs, and all that would be within the schematic that Pastor Cowan mentioned.
Thank you.
Okay, and then so just a quick clarifying question, and then Mr. Miller will get to you as well. So this campaign with the, and I will call it a campaign because that's what this pretty much is. It is more of a grassroots campaign with the state at the moment. Is that correct?
That is correct. Debbie Moore, for the record.
Okay, and would we be, is our plan to adopt the same grassroots type of implementation for the city of Las Cruces as well? Is that kind of our goal here?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Debbie Moore, yes, it would be the goal of to do grassroots, non-enforceable, non-state. You know, in my brain, I'm thinking of getting it out to all the nonprofits who have client base, to have their clients take the safe promise, to have the churches, you know, put in their bulletin, take the safe promise. I, as a Greater Las Cruces Chamber, would work with the other chambers, Mavita, all the organizations, just begin to saturate the city with their business license, to saturate this opportunity, and really use the media, social media, our radio media, any media that we have access to, print media, to get this word out that this is an opportunity for us to showcase. I've already started it on the small scale with the chamber, just because I know there's some people out there that are hesitant about going out. And so, yes, it would be considered, I call it a campaign too, because that's really what it is. It's a campaign and it's grassroots. So that makes it, I think, more empowering to people.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mrs. Moore, for that clarification. Mr. Miller, you have your hand raised next, sir.
Sure. George Miller. I think you've answered most of my concerns in the discussion. I'm worried a little bit about differentiation. If we switch away from the Mexico logo too much, that people can get confused where they go in the state, or where they, if they see, is this the same thing as the state that Las Cruces is doing, and so forth, like that, to make it very simple changes, and that they can still recognize a statewide effort. I support it. I'll show you my logo, my Facebook logo. It's I'm using it already, so you can see that on the screen, and so it's you know, it's a good, wonderful thing to use, I think, but not to change it so much that it really makes it look like two different campaigns. That's all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Do we have any other discussion on making this our first action point to present to the city council? As I see none, we do have a motion on the floor by Mrs. Moore, and we also have the second closing discussion. Let's go ahead and do a vote. If you can please come on with video and give your yay or nay, we can go from there.
Mr. Chair, can you please also remind them to say their name? Thank you.
Of course, thank you. If you can also please say your name when you are casting your vote. Thank you.
Debbie Moore, yes.
Sharon Thomas, yes.
Doug Cowan, yes.
Michael Harris, yes.
George Miller, yes.
Brooke Montgomery, yes.
Chris Shaljo, yes. I believe there's a few others that have not spoken up. If you will at this time, please do. Okay. Any nays? Seeing and hearing none, motion does pass. This will be our first action item as well as our first discussion item for our next meeting. Thank you very much. Moving on with the agenda, we have our next talking point, which is looking at the transportation. I believe, Mrs. Thomas, you are up.
Thank you. So now I do share screen, right? And then I choose the PowerPoint. Can you see it?
Yeah,
Yes, you're.
Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I make it bigger?
There you go.
Okay. Oh, it works. Okay, good. So we talked about, I think it was Debbie Moore who wanted to know what was going on with the transit, and it relates to what we just talked about giving people confidence about using the transit. So one of the things I looked at was we keep looking at this Altogether New Mexico COVID safe practices that the governor put out. And one of the things I noticed was that it didn't include anything about public transportation. And so that's a bit of a problem. I've talked to Joanne Ferrari and Bill Souls to see if there can be some additions at the state level, but I haven't heard back from that yet. There are lots of guidelines. Most important to us is the one that comes from the New Mexico Department of Transportation. So they've put out pretty consistent guidelines from the transit and rail divisions. And I think both Roadrunner and the South Central Transit District have made use of some of those. There are other agencies to get information from, the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Transit Admission that's part of that federal office. They have guidelines. And the American Public Transportation Association, which is a professionals organization. They actually even have a white paper. They have all kinds of information available. So just briefly, the New Mexico Department of Transportation, our Transit and Rail Division, they have information about cleaning. They're suggesting to eliminate fares so that you're not touching and passing things back and forth from hand to hand. Possible using rear door boarding, if that's possible. In some cases, if there's high volume, then they might have to add vehicles to a particular route. And if they pull up at a stop and they're already very full, then they might skip that stop. So those were the suggestions from the New Mexico Transit and Rail. They also, and you all have this PowerPoint. I don't think the links will work from the PowerPoint, but if you go to New Mexico DOT and look it up, all of these things, so they have information specific to transit operators, transit maintenance workers, station workers. So they've done a pretty good job, and you can find a lot of information from just that site. So the, sorry, I went the wrong way. So one of the things the federal government has done is to distribute cloth facial coverings. So they distributed 86.8 million to airports and 9.6 million to transit agencies and Amtrak. So that's one of the contributions is from the department, the U.S. Department of Transportation. They also passed this CARES Act, which made some relief funding. I think that Michael Bartholomew and David Armijo, do you want to say anything about this funding? Did we get some of it?
Sorry, this is Mike Bartholomew. Sorry, I had to find my unmute.
Okay.
The city of Las Cruces, it was basically awarded by a formula program because through the same formula program that we get our standard funding with. And the city of Las Cruces got just over $6 million. And what's important to know about the CARES Act is that it is 100% federal funding, doesn't require local match. So the purpose behind it is to get us, create that ability that we can get service back to normal as soon as we're able to, as the conditions allow, without additional strain on finding local match funds for the federal funds that we get. This should carry us for well into next year, possibly through much of next year, and cover our operating. It'll be primarily covering our operating expenses.
David, did you want to add anything? Not hearing from David. He's on the road. I know he pulled over. Just said he was on. Okay, we'll go on. Maybe he can get back. So these are some of the things that the United States, the Federal Transit Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Transportation. So they asked that public transportation agencies that they make sure their guidelines work with the Center for Disease Control and with the OSHA guidelines. And, you know, in the big cities like New York and Chicago, the transit has been very important to get essential workers to work. So it's been a kind of a lifeline in part of the response to COVID. So, and then finally, the American Public Transportation Association, as I said, they wrote a big white paper on it. They're very research oriented, but they also have an email hotline that transit members can call if they want information, and they also have a frequently asked questions page. So they're also contributing to what people are doing in response. So David, Michael, this is your page. You want to talk a little bit about what Roadrunner's doing?
Sure. Right when the pandemic started, we went fare free, and within a day or two, actually, after that, we had to start reducing service. The reason that we went fare free was, as was noted earlier in the discussion, to reduce the amount of cash handling and fare media handling that we have to do. We're still fare free at this point in time. We're researching a bit about best practices in handling cash fares, so we can go back to it. Our long-term goal regarding fares is that we'll see it here in Las Cruces. We'll probably see it nationwide, to more of a move to cashless types of fare collection, whether they be through apps or touchless cards that touch the fare box. But there's a lot of technology that has to be purchased and prepared for behind that. Our service hours were reduced. Our normal service hours are 6:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. weekdays, and 9:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Saturday, but we went Monday through Saturday, 7:30 to 5:30. The main reason that we had to reduce our service hours is because the city has a program for city employees that are susceptible to complications if they catch the COVID, or if they get infected by the COVID virus. And so they're out on a special type of paid leave that the city's created, and it basically has really reduced our driver workforce. So the level of service we're putting out there is based on the drivers that we have available at this point in time, until we can get drivers to come back to work. We are holding our daily driver briefings outside to encourage the social distancing. We don't use our confined room. When non-essential businesses were closed, we did campaign a lot through our Facebook page and through ads with the help of the city's community outreach department, urging people to only ride the buses for essential business. We've kind of dropped that message now, because non-essential business, so-called non-essential businesses, are now opening up again, and people are needing to use public transit for more and more reasons. We do require the use of face masks at our facilities and on our buses. We have almost from as soon as we were able to get them within a few weeks, we provided disposable masks. We're also getting a lot of cloth masks available that we've been handing out to our public as well. When we've had small personal hand sanitizers, we've been trying to acquire those, and we give those out to our customers upon request. The Federal Transit Administration actually just sent us, I believe it was 1,500 of the cloth face masks that Sherry had mentioned earlier. And now we're able to actually order even more through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So we just put in an order for another 5,000 of these cloth face masks that we'll be able to use for public, for staff, and even non-transit users if they come in and ask for one. Drivers we supply the drivers with masks, and then we require them to wear a mask. There's certain things they have to, they wear gloves. Some of them wear gloves all the time they're driving. At the very least, they need to wear gloves when they're doing close assistance with a customer, like having to give an arm to help them walk, for example, for our dollar ride drivers. If they have to secure a wheelchair, then they have to wear the face mask. Actually, for securing a wheelchair, they're wearing the N95 face mask and using gloves. Drivers have the option of using face shields. We've actually had a local fabricator fabricate driver shields that we're installing in our fixed route buses right now. I believe maybe about half of the buses have been done now. So that basically puts the driver behind a plexiglass shield that helps prevent the transfer of the disease. We are constantly encouraging social distancing. For example, in our intermodal center lobby, there's signage on the floor that spaces customers out. We limit the number of seating. We've got signs up on the buses that help space people out in the bus, so not all of the seats are occupied. We clean the buses thoroughly each night, and at least once a week, there's a special fogging machine that we use to get in all the nooks and crannies of the buses for disinfecting. We hired some individuals from a manpower type agency to every time the buses come into our intermodal center, every hour, every half hour, they're out there wiping down all the highly touched surfaces in the buses, and they keep the surfaces in our intermodal center as wiped down as well. Let's see. The dollar ride vehicles are also clean. There's cleaners there at our base on Hadley. When the vehicles come in, they get cleaned, and the dollar ride drivers themselves have the cleaning materials so they can wipe down areas where customers are ridden before. So these are the kinds of things that we're working on. We're part of the city, so as we return to work, try to gear up to our normal level of service. In part, we'll be following the direction citywide. Every section in the city has had to create a return to work type plan as well, and we're about ready to implement, maybe allowing a little bit closer contact, but we're reviewing that as we get close to July, our next month here. As far as returning service to our former level of service, a lot of this is going to depend about how the city allows drivers who are immunocompromised to come back and start working for us. As far as fares go, that's going to be, we still have to research how we're going to properly handle fares to reduce the spread of the disease. And I think with that, I would just take any questions. Anybody there?
Thank you, Mr. Bartholomew, for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, please do raise your hand. Mr. Miller.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. I'm glad you're taking so many precautions, and it's a wonderful system. I'm concerned a little bit about the cut down in hours and returning the fare to, I'm thinking about the poorer people in the neighborhoods that have to ride the depend on the transit system for their transportation to jobs and things like that. And we're trying to get the economy back going, and they have no way except for the transit system to get there. Is it possible? What happens when you have a full bus and you pass a stop? What do you do as far as going back for those passengers, or they have to wait for the next hour? Or, and what would be the impact of if you kept the, I don't know if it's possible, elimination of fares just as a permanent kind of thing? What would be the?
Well, actually, that's a good question, because it's a whole separate discussion. I know it's been brought up by City Council before as well, is that there are communities out there, this is even going back before this whole COVID pandemic, that have been experimenting with fare-free transit services. They view transit as basically a community amenity. Fares never cover much of the cost of a transit. It's just a fraction of the cost of what it costs to operate a transit system. So the whole idea of experimenting with systems is out there right now as well. So that's a good point that you make. You know, of getting people to make sure that they're able to get to jobs and everything if they're low income individuals, which involves a lot of our particular riders. Your other question was about passing up stops. I believe we are not passing up people at stops. We do try to define the capacity on a bus by how we set up the seats and everything. But at this point in time, we're not refusing a ride to anybody. We haven't really had a problem yet with the ridership picking up enough that we've had that situation where we're at a capacity where we think the bus is too full. We're still picking up the passengers as we go by. And I think that we would, if say our capacity was 50% on a bus, there could be times that we would be a little bit over 50%, but then again, we're encouraging our riders to wear masks, to distance themselves as best they can. We provide them with the materials to help keep themselves and the fellow riders safe. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Chris, David Armijo's trying to get on, and he's trying to talk, but nobody's hearing him.
Is he on mute?
He said he turned off the mute.
Is he one of these phone numbers on here, Sharon?
I think so.
Just a heads up, whenever you're on a phone, you can't unmute yourself unless you know the code. So I guess I'm not sure which number is his.
His number's.
What I'm going to do is I'll unmute both phone numbers, but if they could just keep themselves mute on their own phone, and then when they speak up. So both are on.
And if you.
Okay.
David, are you able to get on?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sharon? Oh, here we go. Thank you. You got that. Thank you. If I could just briefly add a few things, I don't want to go through everything that, because a lot of what Michael said, we're doing as well. I think some of the differences, the type of service we have, which is rural, has a larger footprint because we cover so much more Doña Ana County. We also have smaller vehicles, so we only have one door. So what we've done to instrument some protection for both the riders and the drivers is we did issue out face masks, but also face shields. And on most of the buses we're in service right now actually have shields built into the bus. And then we marked off the seats behind the driver, and then we separated some of the seating where people would sit. Our ridership's much less, so we've been able to operate without any problems along those lines. Since everything shut down in March, April, we lost about half of our ridership. However, we maintained 80% of the service. We cut out all the school trips, but we're operating everything else as normal. And in the last 30 days, ridership has come up almost 20%. So we're seeing a lot more people ride the bus, and we expect that to continue to grow as we work our way through the COVID-19 pandemic. Beyond that, I think, all the same things. We require face masks. We require everybody to ride the bus has those. The operators have those. They have gloves. We continue to provide the operators with new face masks. In fact, we were at the division or our operating facility in Anthony today, handing out new face masks to all the operators. So we're starting to build our way back. We're preparing that this is going to go long term, which means probably deferring revenues for an extended period of time. We're actually looking at introducing some off bus payment where we might just use smartphones, and we'll figure something out for those who don't have that. So we'll be doing a test run of that later this summer. Any questions I might add? Sharon, anything else?
Any questions from anybody? So we'll turn it back over to Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like Mr. Harris has a question. Go ahead, Mr. Harris.
Yeah, this is Michael Harris. I guess question for both. I know it's getting summertime and it's super hot, but what kind of consideration have you given to like the ventilation systems in the buses? I know I was reading an article a while back about some spreading events that happened on buses, and they were actually able to trace like where the people were sitting and found that those who were sitting around an open window, they had opened the windows on one side of the bus, and some people who were on the non-ventilated side of the bus, you know, had some spread, and the people who were sitting next to the open windows were okay. So have you given consideration to that? Is that even a thing that the buses can do?
Do you want to start with that, David?
Yeah, let me go first. This issue came up early on with our maintenance, our maintenance manager, Fernando Ramirez, answered that, you know, the nature of the AC units we have, it filters out itself. So it constantly shoots in clean air that's been filtered. So we actually recommend that people don't open the windows. We can actually provide fresher air that way, because the air that's in the system and in the vehicle goes out one way, and it's better to have it that way. So we understand what you're describing, and that could actually be a problem, but we're not experiencing that.
And this, Mike, for Roadrunner Transit, we really haven't dealt specifically with the ventilation system itself, other than we do the fogging of the buses periodically. But again, the windows stay closed pretty much this time of year when it's hot, because we have the way our AC works in a similar manner to what David described. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah. If I may add one last thing, since I was just talking to my employees, one of the things we instituted, and this is something that maybe Michael could look at for his people, we are giving our employees a $100 bonus every 2 weeks, and using some of that CARES Act money to do that. And, you know, I'm sitting outside, I had to park to take this call. I'm outside the Staples. There's a big sign that says, "To our healthcare and first aid responders, thank you." Thank you is great, but a little bit of money is also very good for the employees, because they're having to balance between going out on unemployment and being gone from work. And we have had a few employees who we had to put in through a period of staying at home until they could check out. Every employee that's taken the test has successfully failed the test, so nobody has COVID. We haven't witnessed a rider as well on the bus, and we know our riders pretty well. So far we're all doing extremely well, and I know Roadrunner is too, and this is a challenge for all of us. But I think if we continue to maintain a very clean and safe environment, both for our employees and for our riders, I think we'll be in a much better position economically to do our part as we're trying to bring people back on the bus, both for school, I hope, this fall, and for work. And I think that's what we're here for.
And this is Mike from Roadrunner Transit. We don't have a specific program for a bonus for the drivers, although, as I mentioned earlier, there was a special leave created for city employees who are unable to come into work or unable to work at home, which is the case for most drivers, that they actually are on paid leave all this time. So they're not on unemployment. They are getting paid. For drivers that are continuing to work through this, the way the policy works for this leave, we call it extraordinary leave it's how it's set up in the city. is that there'll be 15 days for full-time employees, 8-hour days of leave that will be it could be transferred to their annual leave at the end of this pandemic. And I've heard discussion that possibly they could have the option of having that leave paid out rather than taking it as leave. So those are things that the city is looking at right now for its employees.
Okay, I think we can turn it back over to Chris now. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you for the wonderful presentation, Ms. Thomas. We do appreciate it. Let's go ahead and. Okay, and if we can end the screen share and get back to the meeting. Perfect, there we go. Okay, wonderful. So any other discussion or questions from Mrs. Thomas or anyone else on the public transportation topic of today? If you would raise your hand if you have any. And I don't see any, so we are going to go ahead and continue on to our next talking point. Let me just pull this up. Francisco, do we have someone that is going to be speaking on the worker support and protection services during COVID-19?
Mr. Chair, yes, and that person would be me. I am going to be presenting some of the things that have happened with the state and the Altogether New Mexico document. The latest version, which was released, I believe, on the 20th. Well, it was published on the 22nd, released, I think, in the 27th, if I'm not mistaken. But if you allow me, I'll start the conversation with this by sharing my screen.
Of course, please do.
Can everyone see my screen? Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent then. Well, thank you very much, members of the board. The first thing that I wanted to mention is that when we were looking to see what topics to discuss when this specific issue was brought up about the worker support and protection since COVID, one of the first things that came to my mind was, well, the document that the state has put out for this. So the state has diligently gone for industry by industry or sector by sector rather than industry as a sector, and describing certain changes to the normal day-to-day operations in order to ensure COVID-safe practices. So with that, the document, and I've provided the link right here, and let me make this a bigger screen. Can everyone see the full screen?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So the link to the document is this one right up here. And when we give you back the information for this specific presentation, you will be able to see it right there. Now, this is a 53-page document in which we had already shared it with you, and it indicates with the different, specifically to all of these different sectors, some of the COVID-specific practices that people must adhere to. So some of these are required, and some of the ones are what they call good practices or safe practices or best practices to acquire as you are behaving in one of these. One of the most important things that also comes to my mind is to keep in mind that with a pandemic, the safety of others is your own safety. So when we are referring to that these safe practices are designed to protect the customers, there are also plenty of items in here that protect the workers that are inside working in these industries as well. So the protection of the customers, the protection of the workers, because the protection of one implies the protection of the other one, specifically in a pandemic. The fact that someone else is not sick makes me safer, is basically the idea that goes in plenty of the things that go beyond this. So from the general things, as I was mentioning, there's some general recommendations for all businesses, and then there's some specific recommendations for retail, restaurants, offices and call centers, grocery stores and farmers markets, summer youth programs, manufacturing, hotels, golf courses, tour operators, houses of worship, farm, ranch, dairy producers and processors, veterinarians, pet care services, construction, automobile dealers, services, salon spas, and medical providers as well. So it's important to point out that this is going to be a summary. I'm not going to be presenting the 53 pages that the entire document is provided. I highly recommend that the people watching this and live stream, as well as the members of the board, if you have questions with regards to a specific industry, you go directly to the link right there, and then you provide it for the rest of the the business in which, or the sector in which you are operating for. That's the full list that you will be able to find right there. So what are some of the general recommendations for all employers? Most recommendations are aimed at maintaining social distancing and constantly cleaning surfaces and hands and high contact products. So the first thing that we have right here is to limit operations to remote operations to the greatest extent possible. And again, these are recommendations for all businesses. Arrange for 6 feet distancing, close common areas to avoid congregations. Meetings, if there's meetings that need to take place, they need to take place remotely. Their employers need to provide face coverings for employees, and some restrictions apply with regards to if you're exercising or if you are doing the medical conditions, you have a medical condition, training employees in cleaning and hygiene and disinfecting protocols, hand washing, sanitizer available for all employees, screening employees daily before entering the workplace for COVID-19 symptoms, and prohibit employees with known close contact to a person who is lab confirmed to have COVID-19 to return to work until it has been authorized by the Department of Health. Minimize non-essential travel, as well as isolate if you're coming back from out-of-state travel, as well as adhere to all CDC and OSHA guidelines. So those are the big general recommendations for all employers. But what are some of the most specific recommendations that this document provides? So on your left, you're going to see the ones for retail, and your right, you're going to see the ones for restaurants. If you are discussing retail, then you have to adhere to the maximum occupancy limits as per the state's public health order. There's also, and actually you've been able to see this in some of the retail stores, you have to provide decals for 6 feet distancing, as well as trying to, at the greatest extent possible, provide one-way aisles. They're also recommended to communicate the maximum occupancy limits and to encourage the face coverings for all the customers that go into their stores, as well as maintaining a stringent cleaning and sanitizing schedule. And for every 2 hours, at least once for every 2 hours, clean the high demand touch items such as doors and credit card terminals. As you will see, these recommendations are very specific to the sector. For instance, in the restaurants, some of the ones that they provide is adhere to all the general retail and general guidelines. So the restaurants have to abide to all of the ones on your left panel, as well as all the general guidelines that have been abided before. Discontinue service stations, comply with the public health order with limitations on bars and non-seated service. Discontinue gaming areas in order to avoid congregation. Employees handling items with customers must wash their hands before serving another customer. The restriction on having pets, as well as cleaning and sanitizing reusable items like menus. In terms of offices and call centers, if it provides an in-person services to the public, then adhere to all the retail guidelines that we were facing on the first slide, on the previous slide that we were looking at. The use of signs and stanchions for the floor decals and 6 feet distancing, as well as maintaining a stringent cleaning and sanitizing schedule. So some of these, as you're going to see, are kind of repetitive, but they have to be very specific. And again, these are not all the guidelines. This is just a summary of all the guidelines that there is in there. So for instance, Summer Youth Camp has 3 pages of recommendations in there. And there's all sorts of recommendations that are kind of clustered between social distancing, constant hand washing for the kids, developing a communication channel with the parents. But there's also some other interesting ones that are very specific to summer youth camps. For instance, one of the recommendations is that there has to be a 5-to-1 ratio for child to adults who live, and they must live within a 50-mile radius in order to avoid having lots of contact with individuals that might be from outside of the area and maybe carrying the virus within themselves. Activities are limited to those that can be within the 6 feet distancing. So again, most of the recommendations are to ensure social distancing, constant hand washing, and a communication channel with the parents. This is to support the contact tracing. In case there is an effect that there was a contact detected, see what other people that person had contact with, and in order to make them aware of this. For instance, with grocery stores and farmers market, they have to, again, adhere to all the general and retail guidelines. If they serve food, then they also have to adhere to all the restaurant guidelines. But for instance, some of the ones that they have that are specific to them is to discontinue the service stations, prohibit the customer supplied refillable containers from being used. So if you have your own coffee mug and you want to go in and buy a coffee at your farmer's market or your grocery store, it is recommended that you prohibit that. Well, it's not recommended, they're prohibited to do that. They have to provide you with a brand new disposable cup. Require customers that bring their reusable bags to bag their own purchases. For the farmers market specifically, there's also a good number of recommendations. From here, I'm just providing a summary, such as the use of food grade gloves, increasing the number of hand washing stations at the farmers market, restricting customers from touching the produce until they have purchased it, the suspending the cooking demonstrations and sampling. And again, these are just some of those recommendations that have been provided by the state. For hotels, resorts, and lodging, again, going to the general and retail guidelines, as well as the maximum occupancy limits for the public health order, limit the number of guests in a room to have to be from the same residence or the same household. So if possible, try to minimize the amount of congregation again. They communicate the maximum occupancy limits and encourage hygiene and safety practices for customers. Again, if food is served in the restaurants or in the hotels, you have to abide to the restaurant guidelines. Suspend all valet services, discontinue the use of communal pools, saunas, as well as gyms, and adhere to all CDC and American Hotel and Lodging Association guidelines for maintaining guest rooms and the laundry, as well as meetings and conventions have to adhere to the rules of the public health order. For golf courses, there's some interesting ones for golf courses. Limit tee times to 15-minute intervals. For the reservation formats, you can have twosome if it's allowed. Threesome is allowed, but I think they have to be from the same household. So there's different denominations that can occur right here, but with the restrictions that we're discussing. Again, the full detail on what the restrictions are in the document of the link that I showed you. One ride per card restrictions, or it can be 2 people per card if they're from the same household, and at any time, a maximum of 144 players can be in the entire golf course. 4 in the tee and 4 on the green for all the 18 holes. So in terms of tour and operators, you have to have staggered seating in shared vehicles such as buses, shuttles, trains, trams, ski lifts, etc., to support the social distancing, as well as you have to arrange for electronic ticketing. And another one of that waiver forms must be updated to reflect the sanitation and safety procedures, and these have to be electronic. Again, these are not all the suggestions that come from this document, but these are just a subset of the suggestions that are very specific to this that I thought was relevant to put in the presentation. For houses of worship, provide drive-in or online services to the greatest extent possible. Attendees must remain separated from the backstage technical personnel as the worship leaders at all times. To collect the tithes and the offerings in the collection boxes only, and encourage only in collection boxes, or encourage online giving. For instance, for farm, ranch, and dairy producers and processors, maintaining a schedule of stringent cleaning, sanitizing, placing hygiene supplies in equipment shops for other share areas, and prohibit sharing food and beverage containers. So as you see, it's a very, very extensive document. But this is the work that the state has provided so that on each individual sector, we see what are the guidelines that are taken in order to protect that specific sector, right? Protect the workers and protect the public or the customers to going back to the first point with which I started in this presentation. If someone is being protected, if someone is safe, if someone is healthy, that makes others protected as well. So there's other recommendations that I did not include. And again, it's a 53-page document, but you're more than welcome to reach to that specific link that I provided at the beginning and have all the different details that are provided for each one of them. And just to point out, as it was in the creation of the purpose for the Las Cruces Economic Recovery Board purpose, is in a way to do something similar to what they have been performing, right? For this person, sorry, for the Altogether New Mexico document has been provided as what are some of the strategies for gradually reopening the Las Cruces economy in a smart, safe, and effective manner that fits the needs of Las Cruces, in alignment with the direction that has been provided by the New Mexico Economic Recovery Council, which was providing elements for creating the New Mexico All Safe document that we are currently looking at. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll just pass it on to the board in case there's anything that you need to discuss with regards to this specific item. And I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have questions. But I think this is more of a discussion for the board members to see and see what are some of those practices. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you for that great presentation. I open up the discussion to any board members for Francisco. Mr. Cohen, go ahead.
Yeah, I with regards to that presentation, I've seen that and looking that over. And if we go all the way back to the very, very first point on the very first page that he presented, I'm just wondering, and I realize our goal is to try to come up with safe practices or recommendation for an economic recovery following these guidelines. So these are kind of like the gutters on the in the street that we've got to stay in between. But the number one point seems to be in contradiction to what we're trying to do, and we're trying to get an economic recovery. We're talking about how to encourage people to go into a restaurant, to go into a store, to do commerce, but the number one point is to limit operations. And so how can we overcome that, or how can we comply with that? Or is there a way that we can maybe make a suggestion that that statement is modified from the state advisory?
Griselda, go ahead, please.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Griselda Martinez for the record. Mr. Cohen, I think that's a great point. The document that Francisco pulled that information from was done, this is my thinking, it was put together during very early stages of phase one, which is the one that we're about to end. Actually, the governor is right now in a press conference, and my expectation is that she's going to announce next steps that may include moving to phase two. And so I think that's going to be very important for us to keep that in mind, because the approach changes in between the phases. And so I'm not sure that language specific that you're referring to, if it's throughout the document or only specific to number one. One thing that the governor has mentioned in in her press conference since the very beginning was that employees, as much as possible, if they were able to stay working remotely. And so I think that's, but you're correct on your statement. How do we encourage people to go out in a safe manner while we are stating to limit operations? But my approach on that is that the document was done early in phase 1, and that may be changing as we move through the different phases to reopen.
So do we have a voice that would be able to help narrate that statement so that we're not in conflict as we're, it's kind of hard to tell people to limit operations, but at the same time, please come visit, or, let's return back to work. So do we have the ability to help create that narrative?
Mr. Chair, Griselda Martinez, Mr. Cohen, I believe that it's going to be very important for us to capture that message in the local safe component. And because, it is 43 pages long, for us to really capture the changes that the governor has made to that initial statement. For instance, at the beginning, it was 25% of businesses that they could operate, right? And now it's 50%. I do not recall what it is in the second phase, but my guess is that it'll be 75% or somewhere higher than where we are. And so I think that the narrative needs to change with the phases, and that we can capture in the language that we use.
Thank you for that explanation. Any other questions? Mr. Harris, I did see your hand raised a minute ago. Did you have any question over the discussion item?
I did, but I lowered my hand. I think Griselda's explanation was good. Thank you. This is Michael Harris, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other comments, questions on the discussion item? Please raise your hand. Mrs. Thomas.
Yes, I think that the guidelines are very good. As I said in our presentation, there's nothing in there about public transportation, so I'm hoping that'll change going forward. But it's a living document. It's going to change, as Griselda pointed out. So I think I'm comfortable with just using it as a reference and making sure that businesses in the city know that document is available, but always making sure to say that it will keep changing as needs change, as the situation changes. So I'm comfortable with recommending the business community use that document, as long as we make sure people understand that it's going to keep changing all the time. We just have to keep monitoring it.
Thank you. I appreciate that comment, and I also agree with that comment. I think it is a living document, and I think we're going to see change over time. Any other comments, questions, or concerns over our last discussion item? As I see no other hands being raised, we're going to go ahead and move on. So that concludes the discussion portion of our agenda for the day. Next up would be future discussion items. Since now we have voted on a action plan, or our first action point. In doing, I would like to hear from the board as to what other discussion items we want to include for future. If we just want to focus on the one that we have been talking about earlier today, I would love to hear from you all to see what you all are thinking and or wanting to do with that. So go ahead and raise your hand. I have Mr. Cohen. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Doug Cowan. I have a couple of things I'd like to see if we could get on the agenda. One of them is, and I mentioned it briefly last week, the idea we're trying to encourage folks to come into our places of business. We're trying to encourage other businesses to maybe implement some things to do. I think one of the things that we could attack is there's certain businesses that are not opening, but we don't know exactly why. It's not that they're incapable of complying, but there might be a list of reasons why they're not trying to open. Is it that they can't get their employees back, and why? Is it a financial situation where they don't have the resources to perhaps provide the inventory or to institute some of the guidelines that are necessary to be open? For instance, I'll just tell you one of the things that we had a real challenge doing in order to open, and that was just to find enough hand sanitizer. That was a challenge. And so of course we overcame that, but there's a lot of small reasons, or they could be small reasons, keeping businesses from opening and becoming creative. Is it a financial end? Is it a lack of employees? Is it a misunderstanding of the requirements? Is it a profitability stage for them? What is it that would be necessary for them to reopen? And I just don't know how we would be able to get that information back, but I find that if we could, we might be able to help them. You know, Miss Debbie Moore there at the chamber probably has some great resources for businesses, startups. Miss Montgomery probably has some for young businesses, how to overcome certain obstacles. And I'm just thinking that if we could identify what is it that is holding back someone from taking the steps to open, or can we help them overcome some obstacles to help them become more vibrant? You know, I drive down the street, and the other day my wife and I we're trying to patronize local businesses. We stopped and ate at a restaurant. They did a fantastic job. They seemed to have a good crowd. They were handling the business well, and it was enjoyable, quite enjoyable, while other restaurants are struggling to do anything. And so I'm just throwing it out there to see if there's a way we could collect that information, and then a way that we could somehow help other people see how they can overcome whatever it is that's hindering their reopen. That would have significant impact on this recovery.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Before we address any one comment, I'm going to go ahead and Mr. Miller had his hand raised. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I think some of the, just kind of following up on that, George Miller, there's some of the businesses that probably need some help. I think so that one thing the city can do is some continued economic resources, I think, for the businesses. I'm thinking more of for future topics that we're missing still a whole piece of our city that's not being, we're talking about people that are able to have businesses already. We're talking about people that can go to restaurants, trying to get them to that segment of society. But a huge number of our city population can't even afford to go to a restaurant right now. So there's something about the unemployment, or we'd be remiss if we didn't address a large part of our voters and our citizens that are just barely able to make rent, and almost to the eviction stages. So we have to have something about what the city is going to do for either getting those people into jobs that can't go back to their old jobs. Businesses aren't having them, or they're maybe retraining, or some type of new business incentives, like what Mr. Cohen's talking about, but also so something along those economic development, sustainable development for the city, I think, especially for those people they're falling through the cracks right now. And there's a lot of people like that. That's, yeah. So some type of topic that'll come up at the council if we don't address it at some point here.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, for your comment. We do have quite a bit of hands raised. Mr. Harris.
Sure, I'll be quick. So following up on both of those, I think something that would be interesting for us to see is data. I don't know who would collect it or how, but if we could get a survey of like people who aren't, or just of everybody, say, are you working, are you not working, and why? And likewise for the businesses. I think that would be very helpful to be able to see presented to this board. It's Michael Harris, sorry.
Okay, and that probably, Mr. Harris, that would be Workforce Solutions, who has been publishing that data. So I think it's just something that we just need to pull from them to analyze, because they have been asking those questions. So that's definitely something that we can look at. For a discussion item, I see we're going to go with Ms. Martinez and then down to Ms. Montgomery. Ms. Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jolene Martinez for the record. I would first like to say that there's some models out there for inclusive economic recovery, and they've been published by the US News. There's some by the New York Times. So there are some models for economic recovery plans that belong to everybody. So those who are already below the poverty threshold all the way through high stakes business owners and private-public partnerships. There's lots of different models that are out there for different strategies that cities can use. And so maybe if we can refer the city to those models that are already existing. And I would just, I'm gonna be that voice in this group, similar to Mr. Miller's, that reminds the group that we do have, just like he said, families who are really struggling right now. And I think one of the issues they talked about at the special session for the legislature was the rental assistance or hold on people's being evicted between now, that's ending in July. And so we're gonna have, in August, we are really gonna see an uptake right when school goes back, and families are forced to figure out how they stay at home with half their kids and send their other half of their children to school, figuring out the solutions that we can provide for them, whether it's childcare assistance, whether it's after school programming, because I think providing our low wage earning workforce with the opportunities to do those things, whether they be city funded or state funded, that we put together some kind of strategies for those average wage workers and positions so that they can return. Many of these families, you're talking about kids going back to school at 50%. And if they have any one child in a different age demographic, is going to keep them at home providing childcare while the other half of their children are going to school, and forcing them to stay at home and not return to their jobs. And so I think those are things that we just need to recommend, maybe, increasing childcare assistance or continuing unemployment benefits to as many, extensions that we're able to, but certainly, those economic recovery plans that are inclusive of all populations. There's plenty that already exist. And I think, maybe that's something we can add to the agenda to look at next time.
Wonderful, thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Montgomery.
Thank you, Brooke Montgomery for the record. Actually, the 2 points I was going to make were, for the most part, touched on by Doug Cowan and Jillian Martinez. One was the schools, since we saw the governor publish the recommendation from New Mexico PED, which may be fluid and may change. I would like to see if maybe we can get some more information from Las Cruces public schools and see how that would affect parents being able to go back, as Ms. Martinez said. The other information was when we're identifying the parts of the economy or which businesses are not reopening, is there a correlation with the employees that have children, or is it because maybe they're reserving their money so that when they can reopen, it makes more sense for them? And so knowing which one it was would help us provide maybe recommendations for those businesses. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say for the workforce training, I really would like to have Tracy Bryan come and talk about the work that's been going on with the workforce talent collaboratives, and to give us an overview of what's out there at least in this county. And then I want to go back to Altogether New Mexico for a minute. Is that something that we want to recommend to the city council, that the city, I don't know if the city's already using it or if it's available on the website or recommended? So I think I just need a little more closure on that particular discussion. And then the other things that people suggested as well, you know, trying to help those businesses that aren't going to reopen, trying to help employees whose jobs are going to go away. I think those are all important issues.
Mrs. Moore, do you want to address Mrs. Thomas's concerns with that?
I will. So, Ms. Thomas, Mr. Chair, Debbie Moore, for the record, the Altogether New Mexico has sort of been the state's guideline from the very beginning. And I think the latest update I saw was June 11th, and it covers new and additional CSPs. So this is the CSP guidelines that every business really is required to go by as we continue to open. So it's more than a recommendation. It's actually state guidelines that really guides the opening. And I don't know, there's some enforceable parts of it. Parts of it is also backed up by executive health orders.
Yes, thank you for that information. And so then my question is, does this committee want to, this is going to be part of our recommendations, that this document, the city make this document available, have it on the website, recommend it to businesses?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Thomas, Debbie Moore, for the record, I believe it's already on their website, and I believe it already has been embraced just because it is the official quote unquote document guideline based from the, I may be incorrect, someone from the city can correct me, but I believe it is the official and it's already on their website.
Does anyone from the city know if it's on the website?
Mr. Chair.
Sharon Thomas.
Mr. Chair, this is Griselda Martinez for the record. Ms. Thomas, it is available, and as Ms. Moore mentioned, from the very beginning, City Council has been highlighting that we are following the guidelines from the governor, and those guidelines are following the CDC guidelines. So those practices have been highlighted from the very beginning, and as we have the reopening timelines as well.
So the CDC, this is Sharon Thomas, the CDC guidelines and also this document, both of those are available on the city website, the Altogether New Mexico document as well.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Thomas, I will have to check the CDC. I don't think the CDC are there because the Altogether document is based on those. And tying it back to what Ms. Rickman mentioned, we do have a section in our website that is COVID-19 resources and specific to small businesses. I believe that's where we would find it. We can send a link to you all, but it ties back to how we can make information more readily available, as Ms. Rickman mentioned earlier.
Okay, thanks. This is Sharon Thomas again. So that's just part of the information we need to get out to the community, that these resources are on the city website.
That is my understanding as well. Okay, perfect. Any other discussion ideas? As we have heard many that we need to be looking at, please raise your hand if you have any other further comment. Miss Montgomery.
Brooke Montgomery for the record. This might not be our top priority to discuss, but at some point I would be interested in looking at research and development and innovation in our labs, if those type of jobs are being affected, and recommendations that we can give for innovation.
Can you clarify a little bit more as to?
Well, I know that there's funding that generally comes down from the state for our younger entrepreneurs. And often that funding comes down from, well, the state and federal government in terms of research that they either do at the university or in labs. And so if we could maybe take a look at that and see if there's any decrease in productivity on that research, and just if that's, I guess, decreasing the amount of revenue that's coming through our community.
Okay. And I think that would probably be best by our economic development department. If Ms. Martinez or Francisco might have anything to say on that, is that something that we should be looking into, that you guys have access for or information on? Ms. Martinez?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Griselda Martinez. Ms. Montgomery, are you referring to research dollars going into the university? Is that what you're talking about?
Brooke Montgomery for the record. Well, actually what I was thinking of and is more grant money that goes to entrepreneurs such as SBIRs and STTRs, which STTR would be collaborative with the university. So small business grants that go for deep tech innovation. Sometimes they're, phase one is about 150,000 for the business. Phase two is usually close to $1 million. And we do have some young entrepreneurs that get those, and their labs may not have as much access to labs right now. So I don't have all the data on that, but I was thinking more of ensuring that they're still able to produce in order to continue getting this funding for their businesses.
So, Mr. Chair, given that this will be focused on entrepreneurship, I would propose Arrowhead to be the lead on that, and I can reach out to the director, Kathy Hansen, for her to give us direction on how that could be covered. But I don't know, given the first comment from Ms. Montgomery, if this is a top priority for this group.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Okay, I have Mr. Cohen has his hand raised as well. Mr. Cohen.
Thank you. I have something that I'd like to try to get on the agenda. It's perhaps, again, not the highest of priority, since the priority here is to get our economy recovered. But I feel that the essence of this board is extremely important. And I think that folks here are volunteering a lot of valuable time. So I have a parliamentary request to be on the agenda for next week, and that is that we establish a parliamentary rule on how to change the meeting times. It may not be inconvenient for many, but my schedule is not as flexible as some. So if we just had some kind of a parliamentary rule, it would certainly make my life a little easier if there needed to be a change.
Thank you for the comment, and I believe Francisco, I know that you reached out on this as well, but I believe that we are following Robert's Rules of Order as well as Open Meetings Act. So I believe that is our go by rules and documents. So that would be 72. That would be our 72-hour window of agenda changes. And doing everything by Zoom is very chaotic and hard. And from what I understand, doing the YouTube where it needs to be publicly displayed, we are under certain guidelines that are out of our board's control. But if Ms. Martinez or Francisco would like to speak on that, I'm more than happy to let them.
If I may just clarify, in our first meeting, Mr. Chair, we never established the rule for changing a meeting, and Robert's Rules of Order does not make it clear on how to do an exact time change. And so if we could just establish that parliamentary rule, the 72 hours is for the public input. It's not so that the public is aware of that change. But for the participants of our meeting, it would be nice if we just had some kind of established, maybe a secondary time or something like that. But maybe if we could just take a few minutes on the agenda and establish that. That's all I was requesting.
Understood.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
Quick comment. This is Francisco Pallares for the record. And the biggest constraint that we have now with adapting, right now that we're discussing different sectors, in the government sector, we have to have public meetings. And with our channel for distribution, in this case, via YouTube, we can only stream one meeting at a time. So when the board was created, of course, we had established, well, the board decided to have a meeting time, and that meeting time is still established as the meeting time. However, nevertheless, there could be, as it was the case today, in which some meetings might be overlapping with the others, and which the streaming service, if we were live and we could have the meeting in City Hall or in another place, there would be absolutely no problem with this, right? Because we could have the open meetings and people could come to one room or go to another room. But given that we have to stream everything, that is what is put in constraint in with regards to this. So I just wanted to keep that in mind. The actions that we are performing now is that we are trying to see in advance what are some of those events that have already been scheduled for the future to be streamed at the same time. So it is a brand new feature, and we are trying to move ahead for that. So I just wanted to thank you and thank the board for being mindful and flexible as to being able to move their schedule around, especially for something like this. We'll try to move all the meetings to go according as it has been established on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Nevertheless, if there could be in the future, depending on how long this board continues to go, other conflicting times. At that time, we will reach out to chair and to determine the necessary changes, and of course, keeping that 72-hour window before we publish the agenda. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so moving on with the meeting as is, we do need to come up with the next discussion points. I believe we already had a vote on one, which was to go ahead and use our first point of action for the city council in line with the presentation that Ms. Debbie Moore provided with us. So if that is still where we are going, which we did go ahead and vote on, that will be our first discussion item. We've heard many other important aspects to this board that we need to consider. Is there any motion from any of the board members to add any concrete discussion items? Or shall we just focus on the one, which would be what we will be presenting as our first action item to the city council come next meeting? Mr. Cohen.
Yeah, I'd like to move that we put the conversation on how to identify why businesses cannot open, and if there's something that is hindering them, what is it that that we could help identify? Maybe we can help them overcome. See if we can get something going in that direction as well. And again, I'd like to reiterate, I'd like to discuss the parliamentary procedure. I'm sorry that you want to ignore that. I'm not trying to be obtuse about it. There is no parliamentary procedure, and Mr. Francisco's statement does not make it a parliamentary procedure. This is not just an informal meeting. We have to follow guidelines, and so if we're going to follow the rules, we've got to establish that rule according to the city attorney.
Thank you for that comment. If there is another time that works for everyone, I would definitely entertain talking about that, but I do not have the city schedule as to what YouTube schedule looks like. So that is out of my realm of expertise. But as far as that goes, I don't know if Ms. Martinez or Mr. Pallares has something to say to that. That's out of my realm of understanding. But we do have a motion to add. The second discussion item, which would be to understand and try to grasp the hinder or what is keeping small business and or large business closed or from opening when they have gotten the green light. So we do have that motion on the floor as well. Do I have a second? Mr. Maestas, you have your hand raised, sir?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is David Maestas, Interim City Manager. If I could help with the discussion that Mr. Cohen is bringing forward, what the city can do is we can work with you on a timeline that works for your meeting, that doesn't interfere with other meetings and our YouTube channel broadcasting. And then what you can do in accordance with the Parliament procedures is you can have an agenda item at your next meeting or whichever meeting you want to vote on that time so that you can actually have an approval on the time that's going to work for the committee as well as for the broadcasting of the YouTube. Because currently right now what you have is you had a time that was approved beforehand, and now you have an adjusted time that hasn't been voted on yet. So you will need to have a time that gets voted on. So to summarize, we can work with you, Mr. Chair, to get you a time that works. It can become an agenda item for your next meeting, and the committee can vote on that item to approve that you get moved to the time that works for the committee in conjunction with the YouTube broadcasts. Thank you.
So point of clarification on that then. So our first meeting, we did set time and dates of when we would be meeting, how often and what time. So that has been voted and approved by the board for Thursdays at 10 a.m. Is that no longer a foreseeable time for us to be meeting for the foreseeable future? Is that something that we need to discuss? Or is that still the precedent for our meetings going forward?
Yeah, if that's the time, this is David Maestas, Interim City Manager. If that's the time that is in conflict, then that does need to be moved. But I will defer. Griselda has her hand up. I'll defer to her because it appears she has some comments on that. And then I can get back if there's anything for me to add. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Ms. Martinez.
Mr. Chair, Griselda Martinez for the record. We requested what other possible meetings could be in conflict with the previously scheduled day and time. And for the time being, neither one of the two meetings that were sent to us are meeting. So if those meetings resume on a monthly basis, we'll have to bring that back to the committee or with you, Mr. Chair, to define what the alternative time and day may be. Another option is if the inconvenience to move the meeting and there is no quorum, the meeting could be canceled at that point of conflict instead of attempting to reschedule.
Chair?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just one thing to know, just want to bring it up that for sure the fourth Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. seems to be the issue, just because that's Animal Service Center already had their meetings. They have theirs every month at that time. So that it's the fourth Thursday for sure. Just wanted to let you know that.
Okay, so in looking at this, I believe that the next meeting, we can definitely have an agenda item to pick a secondary time. If we can, Mr. Guzman, if you can please give us a reoccurring every day or every week type of time set that works best for the city of Las Cruces, the YouTube channel that we live stream on. That way we can re-look and revisit this since we do have new members to the board. That would be much appreciated. And then if we can definitely add that to the agenda, so that way we can come up with a concrete time to where we don't have to move our meeting again. I'd be appreciative of that. It looks like Ms. Montgomery, you did have your hand raised next. If you would go ahead, please.
Actually, I have to wait for the motion to be second because I want to discuss. So I'll let Debbie Moore go for me.
I'll second the motion for the sake of discussion.
Okay. I wanted to move to amend by inserting that we focus strategically on businesses not reopening and looking at if it's due to lack of revenue if they reopen, and how we can make suggestions if that's what's impeding them from reopening. And two, that is it that their employees have children, and what happens with the school district will affect that. Thank you.
Yes, I raised my hand again.
Yes, Ms. Moore.
Debbie Moore for the record. To be quite honest, I second this so we could discuss it. I feel like we've talked a lot about businesses. I feel like there are some other of the employees, for example, what the city has already been doing in place with employees who are vulnerable. But I just personally, I feel like there's so much of assistance that we're giving to business through other agencies that I would almost like to prefer that we talk about something else so we can get a broader aspect. And to Brooke's point, the school schedules, what's going on with the schools is going to be very vital and very important to the whole community as a whole. And so while I second it for discussion, I'm against putting this on the agenda for right now, which I know is unusual since I'm with the chamber, but I just feel like right now we need to discuss other topics at the present time. And the other caveat I would just say is I just feel like we don't know right now all the reasons why. It's too soon. I would just tell you, I'm watching the press conference and phase 2 has been put on hold for right now. So I think our numbers are going up. So I think for right now, I'd rather hear from some other avenues of I think Jolene and Mr. Where'd he go? I can't see him. He must have jumped off. Had some good points of things that we need to have presentations. Not that I don't love business, but I just think at the present time, to Mr. Miller and Ms. Martinez's point, we need to broaden some of our conversations a little bit more. That would be my point. And I think also, Mr. Chair, I think part of the reason we're having some conflicts with the meetings is we're meeting weekly, and which is conflicting with some of the monthly meetings. So I think that's, if I would guess, that's part of the challenges on the schedule of the city. They have a lot of monthly meetings already on the schedule, and we're a new board and we're meeting weekly. So if I was suspecting, so we might look at 1 week on Tuesdays at this time and 1 week on Thursdays, or however we want to do it, for once in the morning, once in the afternoon. I don't know. I think the Mr. Cowan's making the point, which is on my schedule. I rearranged to attend this, as many of us already have set meetings. So if it's set, then we'll go good. With that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course, thank you. So we do have a motion with an amendment on the floor right now. Mr. Harris, you do have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I was going to agree. This is Michael Harris. I was going to agree with Debbie that we should probably talk about something else. So I guess we can vote on that motion.
So, Mr. Chair, I believe you just Robert's Rules of Orders. Did we have a second on her amendment? Did you make a motion for the amendment? Did Brooke make? That's what I'm like. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
So we have correct. So we have a motion on the floor with a second for discussion. During the discussion, we do have a amendment to the I just said that. So we have a motion on the floor with a second. We have an amendment to the motion with no second. And hearing no second, that amended motion dies. Actually, Mr. Cohen.
Never mind. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Okay, so the amended motion does die. So we are looking at the first motion. If there's no other further discussion, I will ask that you all please unmute yourself, state your name and your vote, whether yay to accept the motion or nay to please. Mr. Harris.
Actually, a parliamentary thing. Could we have somebody just go through everybody's icon in whatever order is on their screen and ask if they vote yes
So
or
you're
no?
just wanting a roll call vote, correct?
Yeah, I think that would be easier than having everybody try to
Perfectly
not talk over each
fine.
other.
Okay. Well, Mr. Harris, you're up.
Okay. No.
No, Miss Montgomery. Please state your name as well, please.
Brooke Montgomery for the record, yes. I
Miss Debbie Moore.
Debbie Moore for the record, no.
Mr. Fitzherbert.
Ron Fitzherbert for the record, no.
Mr. Miller.
George Miller for the record, no.
Everyone's moving around on me. Miss Martinez. Miss Martinez. Okay, and Miss Sharon Thomas, who is not at her computer, it looks like. Okay, motion does not pass. I would like to point out that it is almost 4 o'clock. If we can start wrapping things up with our discussion items for the next meeting. Miss Montgomery.
Brooke Montgomery for the record. It was going in and out, so I didn't hear 2 votes. I just wondered what the vote outcome was.
We currently have 6 nays with 2 that have abstained, I would call it, over Zoom, I guess.
So I guess just a rule question. Is an abstain meaning yes or no?
Neither.
Correct.
Neither.
That is just abstain vote.
Mr. Chair, I never got a vote. You never asked me to cast my vote. This
Oh my
is
gosh,
Cowan.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Cohen.
And I voted yay.
Yay. So we do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nays, 1 yay, 2 abstain. Christopher Shaldra, I vote nay as well. So that is where we currently are. So we do have 1 discussion item for next week. My personal recommendation would be that we focus on that one for the next meeting, since we are meeting weekly. I don't know what you all think of that, if we should just focus on the one that Mrs. Moore presented to us so we can start working on something to present to the city council. What is your all's opinion on that? And then we can go from there once we start getting some concrete ideas and recommendations going forward. Ms. Martinez.
Mr. Chair and the group, I apologize. Throughout the session today, I've been dropping internet service intermittently, and so I believe I missed the vote and the subject matter vote while I was trying to get back on it. This is the 3rd time I've had to re-enter the chat room today, so apologize about that.
Thank you for letting us know. I appreciate that, Ms. Martinez. Any other discussion items that we should be putting on? If not, I'm going to close the discussion items for next week with just the focus on the one. As I see no other hands being raised or recommendations, I would like to close future discussion topics and just going with the one that was put forth by Miss Debbie Moore to focus on the one. If I can get a motion just to accept the one discussion topic. Ms. Martinez.
Yes, Mr. Chair, to make sure that we all are on the same page, could you repeat the topic?
So it'd be, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Moore, we will be going over the New Mexico Safe Promise and using the lost or personalizing it to focus more so on the Las Cruces side of the program, I believe. Is that correct, Mrs.?
Yes, that's correct. Ms. Martinez, Mr. Chair and committee, and this is Debbie Moore for the record. What we had in our motion, we had asked for a timeline and a sort of a systematic description of the program before we actually send it to the city council at next week's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Moore.
Okay, and Mr. Cohen, you have your hand raised, sir.
Yes, did we not add to the agenda also the issue of the schedule, looking at what the city was going to be able to provide us so that we had the alternate scheduling ability?
Correct. That is added to the agenda as of now, but that is not under a future discussion item for the board's recommendation to the city council. So I believe that will be before the discussion section of the agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, so can I please get a motion on the floor to get this part wrapped up, guys, folks?
Sure, I'll move for that. This is Michael Harris.
Debbie Moore, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for that one discussion item of the New Mexico Safe Promise, implementing the Las Cruces personalization side of that. Any discussion? As I see none, I'm going to go ahead and do a roll call vote since that seems to work. Miss Sharon Thomas.
Yes.
Miss Debbie Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Michael Harris.
Yes.
Mr. George Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Ron Fitzherbert.
Yes.
Miss Brooke Montgomery.
Yes.
People are moving around. Miss Jolene Martinez.
Yes.
Mr. Doug Cohen.
Yes.
And I, Christopher Shaljo, yes. Motion does pass. We do have our only discussion item for the next meeting. Moving on in the agenda, we have adjournment. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Ron Fitzherbert for the record.
Thank you, sir. I have a motion to adjourn. Second.
Second, Michael Harris.
Okay. All in favor, aye.
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 Adjourn.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Aye.
Aye.